Hello and welcome to the 22nd episode of the Doom Time podcast, and we're out here. I'm in Austria right now, in the beautiful Alps, and I was riding here with my bike 2 days ago, and I saw this location that looked like something straight out of, I don't know, Witcher 3 or Red Dead Redemption 2 or Skyrim, and I was just in awe. And I sat there for a couple of minutes and I said, you know what? You are going to record a podcast episode here. And I've got just a topic for it, which is video games. Who would have thought, right? Well, this is the type of location that, just recently I was actually playing through Red Dead Redemption 2 and I was so blown away by how beautiful the game is. But then I thought, the average person lives in the city. They don't travel that much. When they do, they see the touristy destinations. And a location like this is relatively unknown, unsearched for, unfound. It's not on the map. It's not a famous spot, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And I felt the sadness of it, how so many of us escape from the real world into these video games that are beautiful, that have masterfully crafted environment, nature that is so lovely to look at that you almost feel like you're there. The soundscape, the design, the details of the trees. And then you go somewhere and you sit in a car and you just run right by it. This particular location is roughly 10 kilometers from the main road, and anyone can reach it. Anyone with just the tiniest amount of fitness can sit on a bike or go for a hike and be here next to a river. There's cows just around the corner. I mean, it's absolutely divine. It's beautiful. It's a place, I could be here all day. I think I might be, might be here all day. But it got me thinking, why? Why do we sometimes sense, because maybe this is just my expectation or my interpretation of the world, but when you play these video games, you often think, oh, this is really nice. I wish I could, experience this in real life. But you never try to experience it in real life. It's not like it's unavailable. Right now, I understand if you want to visit the, Grand Canyon and you live in Europe, then, well, it's going to take a expensive flight ticket to actually get there, and I understand that's an inconvenient. But most of us, if not all, have nature all the way around us. All we have to really do is just stop for a minute and take it in. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I've done cycling for the last, I want to say 6 years. And I do try to do at least one of these types of trips. A trip where I pretty much just pack my stuff, put it into my car, along with 1 or 2 bikes, and go somewhere. I rent an Airbnb, try to find it cheap, roughly, say, 40 euros per night. I'm currently here in Mountaindorf in Austria. It's costing me about, I think, 300 to 400 euros to spend the 8 days. And that's basically all the cost I have. I have a lovely little apartment, a kitchen. There's even a wellness center, so I've got a sauna and a jacuzzi, so I can actually really relax the muscles after a long day on the bike. And frankly, I haven't done long days on the bike. I haven't really done anything extraordinary. I've done, between 40 and 60 kilometers. But I find these types of trips rejuvenating because they remind me of why I've moved away from video games. But then, as soon as I saw this spot, I realized why so many of us have a hard time doing that. Because, frankly, getting to here is a little bit harder than getting to a location similar to this in Skyrim, right? I mean, you just turn on your computer, teleport to that location, right? Even use one of those hacks, teleportation thingies, and boom, you're right there. You put on your headphones, you enjoy the ambient sound, and you feel like you're there. You feel like you've done it. But reality, of course, is a bit different. because most of us, most of you probably don't ever get to experience this. Before I did this podcast, I went on my Instagram and actually asked people if they have any particular questions. The question that really popped into my head was from a guy that's been following this channel for a very long time. And he said, what do you do when you feel inadequate for friendship or relationship? And that really stuck out with me because I think it has a lot to do with video games. Again, they're an escape from the real world. But let's start with the fact that when you feel inadequate for something, that's coming from you. That's not the world trying to tell you something. That is the world reflecting your own emotions back at you. The reason you feel inadequate is because you're not putting in the work. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. It's because you are not putting in the work. That's why you're going to feel, I don't look good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not eloquent enough. Whatever it might be that makes you feel like you don't deserve friendships or relationships or any of that sort, is chances are you're not putting in the work. Now, I might diss video games. I diss them a lot nowadays. Rightfully so, I think. But they did teach me something valuable. Because video games are just a copy of all of this. I mean, literally they are. But they do still follow certain principles. You want to be good in a video game, you have to put in the effort. And the game will tell you. There's this common expression that we use in video games that went, don't blame the game, blame the player, I think, or it was the other way around. But anyway, it stayed in my mind because what we tend to do is we try to look for outside of our own responsibility to find who it is to blame, right? So when you feel like you're inadequate for something, like it could be a job, could be a relationship, right? A girl you fancy. Hell, that brings me back to my days in high school, which is when my gaming addiction started, and it was also when I had a bunch of different women that I had a crush on. Nothing ever came of it. And I felt inadequate. Yeah, all the time I felt inadequate. Like I'm not tall enough, I'm not beautiful enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not eloquent enough, I'm not this, I'm not that. But the worst part is that it was never my fault. It was always somebody else's fault. It's, that other guy's a jerk. That's why he got her. That. We look for excuses that are outside of our control. And one thing that video games did teach me is you have to take your own responsibility if you want to perform well. So, in my case, I was playing War Thunder, which was a very tactically challenging game. And there was one thing that was infamous in this game. It was called Russian bias. So for those of you who don't know anything about War Thunder, I'll make it very simple, which is that the game had 5 main factions, right? Americans, Germans, Russians, or I should say the USSR, because it was a replicant of World War II, Japan and Great Britain. And the problem was because the game was developed by Russians, there was this common misconception that because Russians are developing the game, surely Russian tanks are biased. They're stronger, they're easier to play, they're overpowered, you can't destroy them, they kill you in one shot, whatever it might be. People found countless of different reasons to say that it wasn't their fault that they lost, it was because it was Russian bias. And this developed a huge amount of drama. And I remember back in the day, I was one of the first people, I'll never forget this because the video I uploaded, and I don't know if it's still up on YouTube, but it was on the T-54, 1947. And the simplest way to explain it is that T-54 is a tank from the Cold War era, right? So 1947 means that it was developed obviously after World War II had finished. And then you had the 1949 and the 1951, I believe. The point being is that the 1947 version, I think I'm saying that right, or was it 1949, whatever it was. Anyways, the first of the T-54s had a very low battle rating, meaning that if you went into a game with it, there was a very high chance you were going to be fighting German tanks from World War II era. And so I understand both perspectives, right? From the point of the German perspective, the guy who wanted to play his World War II tank wanted to dominate. kept getting destroyed by a tank he had a hard time killing, because it wasn't a tank developed during the same era. In theory, they should not be battling on the same battlefield, but they were. And so instead of me going out there and walloping how it was unfair, I just developed a better way to play against them. And the way you do it is that I played the T-54 and I realized there was a weakness, a particular weakness it had, which is that if you shot underneath the gun barrel of the tank into the mantlet, it would actually bounce at a 90-degree angle straight to the top of it, one-shotting it every single time. Difficult kind of thing to get, but once you get consistent with it, and after all, gaming is really just one big pattern developing recognition thing, just doing it and repeating it enough times will make you very good at it. I learned how to defeat this supposed Russian bias, but there were so many players that were never reaching that top level, and they all had one thing in common. They were using the excuse, this is Russian bias. Russians are developing this game, this tank is overpowered, this is unfair, I can't compete. Instead of saying, maybe I'm just not good enough for this. And I try to look back at my addiction days, because frankly 10,000 hours spent in a video game is a lot, and it reminds me of there's a comment made on one of the clips that I posted on YouTube. A guy said, "Oh, Orange, I never knew that War Thunder had such a profound impact on you." And I thought to myself, you spend 10,000 hours doing just about anything is going to have a profound impact on you. So, but I try to look back at it now and analyze it through a different lens to do two things. First and foremost, it serves as good memory, okay? If you feel inadequate for friendships, if you feel inadequate for relationships, I want you to look back at your past, high school, primary school, maybe early days of college. Think back on that time, which part of you maybe wants to forget. I want you to remember it. And I want you to really think deep what it was during that time that you did, what was good, what was bad. Analyze it through a different lens, a mature lens. And what you realize is that not just that you learn from it, not just that you confirm certain patterns that you've now actually, finally fully acknowledged, but most importantly, I think, is those memories are going to start being a lot nicer. I don't look back now on the days of video games or the days of being in high school and think, oh, that's so unfair, that's Russian bias, that jerk of a guy stole the girl that I liked. I don't look at that anymore. I think of it as really, really nice memories, because they formed the man that I am today. And that's why, and that was the second topic I wanted to make. Oh yeah, the second thing is that you're growing with it. These are memories, these are part of you. Whatever you spent time doing in the past is important, but we shouldn't dwell in the past, right? It's about the ability to go back, look at a situation, acknowledge it, and then move on. I'll give you an example. My first breakup was such a beautiful, beautiful example of this, because when it happened, it looped me into a very, very weird world of pain. It got me a little bit out of video games, it got me a little bit more into riding bikes, but what it also did is it left me looping in that state. Why did we break up? Why did this happen? Why am I feeling this way? Why? And it was just a loop of trying to find who it was to blame. I was really trying to find, what guy's to blame who stole her from me? What parent relationship had caused it? What was going on with her friends? And it wasn't until I realized that all the responsibility, even though it's not really all of the responsibility, but all the responsibility that laid with me, I had to unburden. But to unburden yourself, you first have to fully burden yourself. That's one of the effects, that you just have to do. And the bike is a beautiful example of this, because you go on there, and you push yourself to the absolute limit, and you actually see how much your body is capable, and that is burden. And once you've seen what full burden is, then you can actually remove it. And I look back now, and I can analyze that relationship in a matter of, 50 seconds, and feel content with everything that happened. Whereas before, I would have spent hours and hours and sleepless nights and just lonely days and miserable feelings because I didn't know how to take responsibility. So maybe this is a long way to answer the question of, why we feel sometimes inadequate. But inadequacy is just another word for not good enough. And the only person that thinks you're not good enough is you. That's why I think the mentality of you has to be, I'm the shit. I don't mean like, you walk around the world behaving, talking to people, or being obnoxious, like, well, my will, king of the castle. You don't want to be arrogantly cocky, but you want to be comfortably confident. And this also goes back to maybe the days of Ego Boy, because there was a stream, I'll never forget this, it was one of the most viewed clips on Twitch, where I said, I'm not arrogant, I'm confident, and something switched in me. Ironically, in the moment, I think I was being a little bit arrogant, but there's a thin line between them, but you have to be confident. As a man, you have to be confident, not in everything else, right? The thing about confidence is, I think it's not about, I used to think of confidence like, I know how the world works, right? I know why those two people, I don't know, broke up. I know why the accident on the highway happened. Like, that's being smart, as smart ass. But I think what confidence really is, it stems from within, where it says, I'm comfortable taking responsibility, dealing with this shit in real time, not caring temporarily what everybody else thinks about it, and living by my dogma. And I think if you do that, you can have a very, very, very lovely time. Another question I got was, and I don't have it written down here because I'm recording on my phone, but I think it was something to do with self-actualization and this idea of how to start building on yourself, right? Where do you find the building blocks? And just as I was reading the question, it popped into my head, because what I've spent the last couple of days doing, I don't know why, but I've been looking at Lego Star Wars reviews on YouTube, which, I don't know, it's becoming a guilty pleasure of mine, because I grew up with Legos. Before video games came into my life, looking back at it, it was Legos. And what was so incredible about that was that in our group of friends in our primary school, we had this competition going on. And what would actually happen is that all of us would come into school, we would say, tomorrow, everybody's going to bring all of their custom build Legos. And it was mesmerizing. I mean, I would give everything to go back there just to see what it was that we built, because I know I built some crazy, crazy nice things. But what it was, I realized, was ingenuity. So I'm going to join two things together: video games and Lego, and the fact that in life there's certain things we don't control. You don't control when you're born, you don't control who you're born to, you don't control where you're born, and you don't control to whom you're born, as in the sense of what your genetic structure is going to be. It's like rolling the dice. It's like going into Skyrim, pressing randomize your character, and you don't know what race you're going to be, you don't know how tall you're going to be, you don't know how, what your IQ is going to be. There's a plethora of different things we don't have control over. And in the world of Lego bricks, ironically, back in primary school, different kids had different levels of parents and grandparents and what they could afford to give them. My parents, for example, they would never buy me big Lego bricks, if ever. My granddad, however, God bless him, every time it was my birthday or Christmas, or sometimes if he was just having a good day, he'd be like, get in the car, and we just drove to the supermarket, and whatever box I showed, he would buy it. But I wasn't a greedy kid, and I would never really choose the largest thing, but I would choose like the second largest thing. So I'd had like those Lego City trains with batteries and big ships, and I was a huge fan of Star Wars, but never quite got any real proper big sets. So what I had to do was I had to make do with all the Lego bricks that I did have, and then conjure up my own versions of it, which was funny because on the day that everybody brought their own Legos to school, you had the kid that had all the money in the world, and he would bring the biggest, largest sets, which inherently made me feel inadequate, right? Because you don't have the biggest set. You had the guys who just didn't have a lot of skill sets to do particular rebuilding, so they would just bring whatever was built by Lego with no modifications. But it became a bit of a competition, like who can create a better version of it, who can make a more advanced, Starship. And the reason I say this is because I think a similar process is happening in life. Some people, when you look at them, seemingly they don't have to build anything. You know, it's built by them, by their background, right? They're born to rich parents, they're got good genetics, they're beautiful, they're strong, whatever. Some people seemingly don't have to do a lot of work. Others seem to feel like they have to, you know, prove themselves to the world over and over and over again, and it does feel like it's unfair. But then again, so is the world of video games, you know, so is the world of building Lego. And I think the process of real enjoyment is to realize that you can make amazing things out of that which you have, not that which somebody else supposedly has better. And the reason I say this is because ironically, the kids that had the biggest sets, the kids that had access to anything they wanted, from toys, video games, you know, food, those kids, I feel, missed out on that level of customizability. The starships, right, the custom builds, were never the best from those kids. In fact, those kids were the ones that never even bothered to develop something nice and unique. And the most ironic part is, and I'll never forget this, is because when I came there and I had to make something, like I had to make a Lego set that I didn't have. I know which one it was. So Star Wars Episode 2, The Clone Wars, had a chase between a bounty hunter and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker in a yellow speeder. And it was the bounty hunter's ship that was very, very particular. And that set, as far as I'm aware, there's only one set that was ever made by Lego. They never made another one. And it had certain parts that I had. I even had a little specific window that came from, I think, certain trucks from a Lego City, some completely other, you know, subsidiary of Lego. And I'll never forget, because the day that I got into school, on one of those days when we said, hey, everybody bring all of your Legos, let's make, you know, we're gonna showcase all of our amazing spaceships. Everybody was jealous about that ship that I had. Because the irony was, it was from a Lego set they could no longer buy. The only place they could look at it, because back then the internet wasn't really prominent, what we did have is we had those, there were these, you know, you'd go to the supermarket and you'd get a Lego booklet that would showcase all the new sets. And we would swoon over that stuff, you know, like in December it was just like, oh, I want all of this. Oh my God, this is amazing. Oh, this is coming out. This is being released. Oh, please, dear Santa, you know, can I get? But it was so amazing to see, because the kit that brought in the new biggest, you know, MTT from episode 1, you know, all the features that would open up and the droids would get released, and that kid never, and I mean never, got the same level of attention as a custom build that I brought out there. And I think the same is true in life. The person who seemingly has everything going for them doesn't really get the attention you think. Let's take two people, for example. Let's take a model, and let's take somebody who came from a foreign country at times of war. Which of these two do you think is going to have a more interesting story to tell? And I'm not trying to dismiss the work of a model, right, or the work of somebody who was born into a rich family, you know? I'm not trying to dismiss that what they have achieved is insignificant, but I think in the grand scheme of things, the people you want to meet, and this goes back to, you know, feeling inadequate for friendships, feeling inadequate for relationships, people have to love your story. I mean, that's what I personally fall in love with the most, and I realize that most people that hang out with me, they're pulled into the story. When I go on a date, it's the story that I tell about how I overcame a gaming addiction, how I got into cycling, how this happened, how that happened. Hell, the reason why you're listening to this podcast is because you like the storytelling aspect. And so you just need to have an interesting story to tell. Whereas most people that have grown up with everything given to them, they don't need to really build on that. And yeah, that looks bittersweet and painful and annoying at start. But when you look at 50 or so years of life, you realize that that life of theirs is going to be pretty fucking empty. Something similar happened in War Thunder, if I dared to go back and debate this as well, but it was called pay to win. Modern games, and the reason why they suck so much, I think, is because they're online, they're never ending, there's no story to them. If there is, it's poorly written. But most importantly, it's, Mum, give me my credit card and buy my way into whatever. And so you have people that on day one have access to things that you've spent years and years and years grinding towards. You know what the difference is? They're never going to respect that. They're never going to have the same level of respect for having grown that, for having built that, for having felt that. And I think the same is true for everything in life. A relationship that would be given wouldn't be very beautiful. That's why relationships are nice, when you have to sort of fight for them a little bit. Say with friendships. You don't just become friends with someone. Usually there's a story behind it. So start writing that story. Start making those situations happen. Put yourself out of the comfort zone, and you realize that your supposed feeling that you're insignificant, that you're not deserving of it, will just go away. And think to yourself, what are the skills that you have? If you spent the whole life playing video games, then we can sit there and say, oh, I've wasted all my time. But can you try to look for the positives? Can you try to find what it was about the video gaming experience, what it was about the cycling experience, what it was about the heartbreaks, or the accidents that you have? How can you package that into something that makes sense for you, something that's going to build you into a better character, something that's going to give you juice in the story, and then tell that story? And I guarantee you from the bottom of my heart, if you do that, the world will start looking like a very, very beautiful, beautiful place. I spent a long time, trying to figure out my own play style. And that's one of those most important things that video games can teach you, is play style. Even Lego. Some kids played with Lego, other people just collected Lego, had it on their shelves. Some kids would just, build the set once, never returning to it again. Sometimes it's about tearing things down. It was like looking at a Lego set and thinking, how can I do this better? How can I, I'll tell you a story. We used to go camping with my parents. We'd go to Croatia, we'd set up a tent, and I'd have to spend like between 10 and 14 days there. And for me, I think after about 5 days of being away from home, I start to miss it. And I'll never forget this, because what had happened was, before we had left, I had this plan to build I think it was a Boeing 747 out of Lego. So I had one of the Legos, planes, and I thought, how can I make this thing into a Boeing 747, the jumbo jet, the greatest plane ever made? And what ended up happening is I spent the entire time, every time I would walk from our tent to the toilet and back, or from my tent to the beach and back, which was going through the campsite, I would just talk to myself all the bloody time, thinking, how can I build that plane? What does it have to have? It needs to have gears that are going to go in and out. It needs to have flaps. It needs to have doors that are going to open. Okay, how do we design the nose, and how are we going to do this? And I spent so much time thinking and planning that by the time I got back home, in a matter of hours, it was built. I just had a big box, giant box, probably like weighing 10, 15 kilos, and I would just toss everything onto the rug in the living room, go pick through the parts, and I was like a hawk. If there was a part I needed, it was just yoink, yoink. I just saw all the pieces exactly, built the thing together, but back then there were no pictures. So I've got no images. Most of the things I ever built, I've got no images of. They only live in my head. And I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. Honestly, not sure. But that's why I think that's another story you can tell. And with stories, you also revisit some of your past. I think what it is we have to make our past interesting. And we can do that through perception. Because what happens to most of us is we get stuck nowadays, forgetting to live in the moment, the present, thinking too much but doing too little for the future, and spending all of our time seemingly looping in the past. And that's something I try to break with this, the outdoors. Because when you know, there's a waterfall over there, there's cows just around the camera, there's a beautiful mountain range. Behind me there's a river here with a little bridge. You can see the Alps. You can't just look at this. You have to just take it in. You really have to just like breathe in and say, bloody hell, it feels good to be alive. And that's an effect of nature. Fresh air, flies are all over me the entire time. I've been trying to get them off. That's the effect of nature. And I think we've lost that connection. We've lost that sense of just turn everything off and just live in the bloody present moment. And as much as I hate to admit this, I think most of us are more comfortable taking this break from life on a beautiful alpine meadow in a video game rather than actually going to an alpine meadow and doing this. Honestly, this is my first time in a couple of years where I've actually just sat down and said, you know what, just sit here and do bloody nothing. I can recount a lot of times where I did that in a video game, where I would just stand there with the character, a character that I spent more effort building than myself, a character that has higher skill sets, is more successful, it's more dominating, more powerful than I could ever be. And seemingly, it doesn't seem to make me content. And the more you realize, it just makes sense that it isn't. How could it possibly be that a video game character is ever going to reach the contentment level for you as a person? That's why I think the outdoors is great. That's why I think we have to disconnect ourselves from those old styles of thinking. And when you do it, you can actually then return to video games. And it makes those video games better, because you understand that what you're doing is you're actually just temporarily being in an environment. You're just temporarily enjoying the story of somebody else. It makes it no different than watching a movie or listening to a person tell an intriguing tale. But it makes your life so much more bountiful, because when you turn off your computer, you can actually go into the nature and you can take all of this in. We live on a beautiful planet, a very, very beautiful planet, and I think most of the time we don't realize that it's there. I often talk about this, but you have walking, you have cycling, and you have driving a car. Walking is going to enable you to look at a lot more details. Just sitting here, I can see all the ants crawling around and, you know, little bits of detail, and a bee and a bumblebee and whatnot. In a car, I would get to see hundreds of these Alps, dozens of waterfalls, you know, rivers and all the cattle, but I would not see them in detail. I wouldn't get to really stop. In a car, if you do get to stop, you stop only really temporarily. You only stop on specific locations where everybody else is stopping anyways. You're taking pictures from locations that anybody else is taking pictures from anyways. Now, I find that a bike combines the two. It allows me to reach certain areas that are a little bit more remote, areas where other people simply don't go, and still brings plenty of detail that I can take in and feel accomplished at the end of the day. I'm by no means urging you to go out there and buy a bike and start riding. I'm by no means urging you to immediately turn off this thing, get off YouTube and start going into the woods. But I think the same way that on lonely nights we look up at the sky and think, oh, how the stars are beautiful, I think we've lost that connection. And I think humans without nature are not going to be humans for a very long time. And the rise of depression and anxiety and all these very first world problems are emitting from areas that are very disconnected from nature. And this location is so beautiful that I'm already contemplating coming here for the third time. I'm already thinking about coming back here next year. I'm motivated to find more locations like this, because it's a feast for your eyes. It feeds the soul. It gives you a beautiful story to tell. It gives you a location to really enjoy. It's a thrill. It's thrilling for life just to be here. In this very moment, I'm not thinking about anything else except for just how incredible life is, how blessed I am, how beautiful it is, how happy I am to be alive here in this moment, how excited I am for everything that's to follow, and how grateful I am for everything that's happened. And that's confidence, that's contentment, and that is my answer to all those questions. This was the 22nd episode of the Doom Time podcast. I do have a plan to bring back a lot more of them. There's been a bit of a hiatus recently, which is ironic. I stopped on episode 21 back in, I think, March or April. I've been very busy. I've been to, obviously I've been to Japan. I've actually visited America as well. I have a lot of work with my personal projects. I'm trying to develop the English course, which is now in sort of the second stage, where the original course is being remodeled to work better, to be more functional. That will also be available very, very soon. TheOrangeDoom.com is constantly getting new things added to it. I'm trying to give you templates. I'm trying to give you free courses for anything that I've been able to pimp out in my life, whether it's sleeping or productivity or, mood journaling. I want to help people get over addictions. I want to help people get over into their confident state. But I will never, and I do absolutely promise this, never will I create content on this channel or in this character without first having tested it. None of this material, courses, templates, guides, anything, none of this is made without me first actually spending several months doing that, seeing the results, knowing that it works, giving it a check mark and saying, okay, I'm now comfortable giving that to you so that you too can improve and better your life. And I look forward to what's coming, because I fell in love with self-improvement, but I also fell in love with storytelling. And I feel like there's just so many more stories I have to share. And I travel a lot, and I want to travel more. I want to travel at least 4 times a year. I want to go abroad 2 times to a country I've never been to. I want to go cycling, 1 time in the Alps, 1 time in the coast. I want to live. Life is very short, but it's also very bountiful. And I think most of us are sitting there and watching it just roll by because we're afraid, because we feel inadequate, because we lack the confidence. I think it's a very, very sad way to live. So that's the promise from my heart, is that I'm going to continue making good quality content. And as always, thank you for watching, listening, and till next time, take care and safe flying.